Okay, so for tonight's, the last in our affordable housing educational series, last month we really dug in and talked a lot about development and financing, had some great examples and representation from the banking community and also Avalon Housing. Tonight, we're really happy to have another great group of presenters. I'm not going to introduce them all right now, but we're going to be looking at some affordable home ownership, financing models, a senior cooperative model, and then Sean White is going to talk about anything else that we've forgotten. I will prompt you, Sean. So we have a great group to kind of run through tonight. So we're going to do it in two different ways. With the first group, Renovare, with Jill and Shannon, we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A format. We're going to follow that up. James is going to do a short presentation, and at the end, a little bit of a Q&A with Sean, and then opportunity for questions throughout. So first though, Jill and Shannon, would you mind introducing yourselves, and then I'll hit you up with some questions.
I'll start. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. We're with Renovare Development. Renovare is Latin for renew, rebuild, and Spanish for she builds. So we are a primarily woman-owned development company based in Detroit. I'll give you a little bit about my background and turn it over to my partner, Jill. We both have over 25 years of experience. Very different, but yet very complementary. I have primarily been in housing for most of my career, completed 20,000 units of housing throughout the country, really focused on creative capital stacks in urban infill markets, primarily based here in Michigan. And do a lot of policy work. So I'm on the board with Smart Growth America nationally, serve on advisory committees for both MISHDA, MEDC. Our company is a member of the Michigan State Land Bank. And as Jill will tell you, we're two moms that are very passionate about community development. We know what community means to us. We know how important it is. And our focus is really social impact and transformational projects in very creative capital stacks that serve deep community needs. So I'll turn it over to my partner, Jill.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Again, I am Jill. I started as a consultant and moved into private real estate in the early 2000s and was working on some massive projects in 2008, which was a really crappy time to be doing that, as most of you probably remember. And was actually working on one of the largest deals in the country in Las Vegas when the market crashed, and had such a bittersweet experience in that project with community engagement that it drove me to take a pay cut and make a huge shift in my career and go to government. I became the head of community development for Wayne County right when NSP was coming. So once again, great timing. And, was there for 5 years and did some really innovative homeownership projects, including one we'll probably end up talking about later with Judge Damon Keith, that I'm really proud of. But that government experience really kind of created the foundation for me as a private developer. Shannon and I came together because we worked together in NSP, and I knew how capable she was and what she could get done. And we came together and formed Renovare Development in 2019. And we're moving forward. We're really excited to be here.
Well, thanks. And we're really happy to have you tonight. So thanks again for being willing to work on this. As part of our conversation, we've kind of walked through a lot around development. We spent a lot of time talking about rental housing and that development and financing. So I know it's a little bit different on the homeownership side. So wanted to see if you could help us kind of with some things. Previously, we also had some folks from Grounded Solutions talk about community land trust, and there's been a lot of interest in that. But I know in some ways it plays out similar to a condo model. So I might hit you up with a kind of a nerdy question right away and have you talk about some different models, community land trust, condo development. We'll start with that one, and then we'll get into the financing a little bit later.
And can I interject really quickly and say, we learned this lesson last time. There's a lot of acronyms in this game industry, genre. So if you could try to spell out acronyms at least the first time for folks who haven't heard them before. Thank you.
Yes. Neighborhood Stabilization Program is NSP. It's like Voldemort. We don't say it very often. Shannon, I'll let you go on this.
How do we, and I don't know, Teresa, if you have specific questions about land trusts. Jill and I have found legally that they're complex. My history has been predominantly doing a lot of housing and a lot of for sale housing and urban infills and a lot of projects in the city of Detroit. A lot of early home projects in the late 90s and early 2000s when we were still focused on some pieces of affordable home ownership before the housing crash. You know, what Jill and I, the ongoing conversations we've been working with a lot of municipalities and a lot of regional units of government right now that just didn't really have the capacity to do the land trust. And in Michigan, we have such a unique structure in our site condo. In fact, it's unlike any other state in the country. Most other states are more adaptive around a PUD type of format without the site condo, that we felt that we could really take with a government or nonprofit entity to manage the administration, we could really take the land trust model and build it right into the deed covenants and restrictions of the site condo. Of course, that's going to work where a site condo is underway. You know, if you're working at a scattered site, if you're not going over and creating a site condo unit for that, that isn't going to work. But in our case, you know, we're looking at new developments within the site condo. And you know, it's very much unlimited what we can put in the deed covenants and restrictions of the HOA as long as it meets local municipal code. So our theory was, you know, that we have been really looking at all the new programming and tools in the toolkit to finance the gap to create affordable housing and really take the structure of that long-term land trust model and build it into the site condo.
Can we hold on a second, Shannon? Let's, because there's a couple acronyms and a couple. All right, so and this may be repetitive, but we'll kind of walk through really quickly the difference between the structures technically, right? A community land trust is when the land itself is owned by a nonprofit organization whose mission it is to create affordable housing with long-term affordability in mind. And then the residential units above are offered to families or individuals on long-term leases. So that is the general structure of CLTs. I'm sure people are kind of evolving that model, but that's legally, you know, how they've been structured over time. That nonprofit entity is built with community members and folks that are dedicated to, you know, on the board that are dedicated to long-term affordability. The problem with that legal structure, there's been tax issues with how that base parcel is taxed. There have been other issues with managing the community land trust. We are starting to see some successful models pop up. Our friends at Michigan Community Capital have one on the west side of the state that we're watching very closely. So I think some of those kinks that kind of made CLTs a bad word, you know, over the last 10 years are starting to get worked out in legislation. And so I think we will see some more of those. The site condo legal structure is basically when you take a piece of land, and we'll use our Ypsilanti project as an example. It's a 5-acre parcel. You are creating units, which are individual parcels within that parcel of land, and you are setting up an organization to master or to manage that entire site condominium. There is a master deed that is established that sets rules, responsibilities, and relationships between the unit owners. And there are bylaws that really set the rules and parameters that the organization operates under. So those are all the pieces that exist, but each owner owns the unit, owns the parcel in that site condominium. And so, you know, back when folks were really getting excited about CLTs, I worked for a group called Michigan Community Resources at the time, and we wrote the legal guide to community land trust, and the attorneys kept saying, there are a lot of ways to meet the end goals that community land trusts are trying to get to, but there's this perception that CLTs are the only way to get there. So Shannon and I knew when we started the Ypsilanti project that we didn't have to do a CLT in order to get the end goal of long-term affordability. And we really wanted to kind of cut out the middleman. We wanted to set the restrictions for affordability in the land documents themselves, and then, you know, eliminate the need for that nonprofit to step in and manage that ground parcel. And so we're using the site condominium, but it really, there's a lot of folks that use other instruments outside of site condos. And that's, I just want to give a little background, Shannon, so keep going, because I mean, we throw out real estate terms all the time, and it's not fair.
I'm actually going to pick up for a second real quick.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was a perfect segue because the city of Ann Arbor actually has done this at least twice, using the site condo to
Yeah.
ensure affordability. And some of you will recall the Stone School condos. So they used home funds for that one, as well as Ashley Muse. That's something we actually administer. And then when you hear Jill and Shannon talk about a deed restriction, on each of those units, there is a restriction that says that you can only sell to a buyer who's also low or moderate income, up to a certain area median income. And then there's a calculation for the for sale price that only allows it to increase by a specific amount each time. So it's also limiting the sales price so that it will stay affordable for that next buyer. So I know that's what you're doing, but I just want to let you all know that that also exists here. But one question I have, and we have had a challenge with this, is you mentioned the homeowners association or HOA. And sometimes those can be expensive. So the difference between Stone School and Ashley Muse is actually fairly significant in the HOA fees, to the point where some would probably consider Ashley Muse no longer affordable due to those fees. So if you might want to take a minute to kind of talk about how do you manage that piece, because that seems to be a little bit of a challenge from time to time.
Well, and I want to disclose that this is underway and we are setting new precedents, because I'm not sure if anything like this has been done. But we are working with our condo attorney right now. Overall, our goal was to make most of what would become the common elements public. We are doing public roads, and this is obviously a big endeavor, and that the city of Ypsilanti is taking on, and their commitment to deliver this in a way that will retain its affordability. But we are also doing a green infrastructure stormwater management system that will also be a public piece that will have an educational component in the stormwater to that. Our goal overall is to limit all costs to the affordable side of the units, which is 50%. Our units in this are 46. So half of those units, they will really, just to meet the legal definition of the site condo, be sharing kind of the imaginary underground infrastructure, rather than that type of maintenance. The rest of the community will be maintained by the market rate side in the association setup. So, you know, therefore we're able to, and the other thing we did is we were very strategic in planning when we talk about missing middle. Number one, we were looking at a typical, you know, urban infill site. If you guys are familiar with the 220 Park Street, that has all the challenges, backs is up to a rail, is contaminated. So we were limited to, you know, what type of incentives we could qualify for. But we wanted to make sure we could maximize density in a thoughtful way, that we were still keeping the character of the historic neighborhood that was surrounding it. You know, part of that was that our affordable units are all in terms single family high density, and that we've got what we call cottage or detached row, which is a, you know, moderately dense, medium dense infill piece and duplexes. The reason we did that also was to keep the site condo structure and not go into condominium fees. So we would keep any of those fees limited. And then to maximize the density, we did add in some condominium units that would serve on the market rate side. So, you know, we were very thoughtful about what that approach is, and still working through all the legal structures as we deliver most of those common elements to the public side, being the main roads and the stormwater management.
I think that's what we'd want to look at in the projects you mentioned, Teresa, is exactly what is the volume of the common element that those individual homeowners are responsible for? And we were very thoughtful in the beginning, like Shannon said, to partner with the city of Ypsilanti to make sure that they could take on as much of that common element as possible to minimize those fees.
And I don't know of any other case of a city picking up some of those infrastructure. So we'll be excited to see how that plays out in the future.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about financing of rental properties and the use of like low-income housing tax credits and home and how you stack everything. And we got to hear Avalon explain their incredible financial stacks that they use at the last meeting. How do you finance these affordable home ownership projects? And I know a lot of this is evolving, but maybe you can give us some of the basics and then maybe where you're pushing the envelope a little bit.
I'll talk about that. So when we look at a project, an affordable housing project, we have a kind of a secret set of checklists that we go through, and we look for, is that city or community a core community, which is something that's designated by, I believe it's the Obsolete Property Act at the state of Michigan. It places that community in line for increased incentives through the state. So that's one box that we look for. We look for whether that community is RRC certified, redevelopment ready community certified, which is a certification process for the state. I always look to whether that community is an entitlement community for HUD funding or part of a local consortium. So we kind of go through this checklist, Teresa, of kind of like figuring out, what is the toolbox going to look like? And when we do a capital stack for a community like Ypsilanti, we will put as many tools as those check boxes give us into the potential capital stack. So as a core community, we are looking at very large amounts potentially through the Brownfield Redevelopment Financing Act, Act 381, really using that Brownfield tool. We're looking at if it's an entitlement community or has access to entitlement community funding, we're looking at home, we're looking at CDBG, we're looking at anything that could come through those programs. And then Shannon is a LIHTC owner, low income housing tax credit owner of multiple projects in Michigan. We will look at scoring for that program to see whether it makes sense to do a 9%, which is the competitive round of low income housing tax credits, as most of you know, or does it make sense to do a 4% LIHTC, and what is the gap financing that's available? So it's a serious amount of brain damage that you go through to really figure out what resources you have access to in order to make that deal pencil. And we'll push the needle. On this project in Ypsilanti, we are utilizing the Brownfield tax increment financing program. There is a section of the statute that allows local units of government or land bank authorities to utilize tax increment financing to fund disposition of property for economic development purposes. And it's a section of the statute that before, I think the last few years has really not been used that frequently, but with the housing crisis in the state of Michigan and the country, everyone is looking to expand the toolbox they have in order to create attainable or affordable housing for their residents. And so we started to see this tool pop up on the west side of the state with Muskegon, Owasso, up in the Upper Peninsula, Newaygo. Like it's starting to pop up all over the place. Local units of government are using this portion of the statute. The state has not signed off. They want to get an AG opinion on the use of school tax for this provision. But so many local units of government are in such deep housing need, they're willing to move forward with their own local legal opinion on the use of this section of the statute. So that financing tool is a big part of our capital stack. It's helping us out. It's helping us bridge the gap. Shannon, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add, specifically when it comes to for sale housing, unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all. As Jill said, there's a specific structure, there's a scoring mechanism that we all know we go through when we talk about LIHTC or other tax credits. Using, for instance, Park Street as an example, we had an extremely difficult site because it was contaminated, wouldn't meet a lot of the federal initiatives because of, it being deemed a facility and location to industrial adjacent, at least from a MSHDA perspective. And two, it being right by the rail, we wouldn't pass noise assessment for home or CDBG. So, just going back to how important it is to really follow the toolkits from federal to state to local and, looking at creative ways for that stack. And we knew that there was missing middle programs coming on board, have been, very actively advocating for American Rescue Plan funding and looking at other tools. So it's just constantly evolving to wait for those tools and policy to change to really fit these needs, because not all projects are a one size fits all that you can adapt to.
I saw James had his hand up for a second. James, did you have a question you wanted to throw out?
Yeah, so I think you were saying that the unused, I missed a chunk there. So you're saying the a underutilized part of the statute. I think you're talking about brownfields money. And so there's a provision of the state brownfield statute that it sounds like allows brownfields funds to be used for a housing project. Does it have to be used for? So I guess first my question is, did I get that right? And then the second part of my question is that restricted to like environmental remediation, cleanup, site work, or can it be used for, the structure itself?
So we have used Act 381 on housing projects since the inception of the statute. My first housing 381 project was probably in the early 2000s. So it's always been available for housing. The difference here, there is a specific eligible activity for disposition of property. So it doesn't, follow under another eligible activity like site prep or infrastructure or anything like that. It's its own eligible activity. And we have interpreted that that eligible activity to mean buying down the difference between the cost of construction and the cost of purchase. So if it costs $300,000 to construct a unit, but the affordable sales price is $150,000, that $150,000 can be TIF'd, can be financed through tax increment financing. That's how Muskegon did it. That's how the other cities are doing it. Basically, it is just but there are limitations. That piece of property has to be owned by a qualified local unit of government, which is a core community, or the municipality itself, or there are other divisions of the municipality it applies to. I think we went through the analysis. I think I saw Jennifer on here. The Housing Commission, we kind of went through that analysis. Could that apply? Or a land bank. If the property is owned by a land bank or a qualified local unit of government, this section of the statute can be used to make those difference in costs an eligible activity for tax increment financing. So what we're doing, James, is we're calculating the difference on those affordable units, and we're seeing the gap between the cost of construction and the sales price is an eligible activity under the TIF program, and then we are front financing that TIF through public and private means and capturing the TIF over a 17-year period as the taxes are generated on the site. We do not have, again, this is for sale, so we do not have a pilot, and we do not have an NEZ, which is another challenge in the city of Ypsilanti because the tax rate in Ypsilanti is massive. So and that was one of the challenges that we worked through with Teresa and Nathan and the other awesome folks at Washtenaw County, really thinking through how do you create affordable for sale units when your residential millage rate is
It's very high. Yeah.
what it is in Ypsilanti. So that was really part of the brain damage, but that's the function of, how that piece of the statute works. And actually Shannon and I were just part of a group through MEDA that published a toolkit on how to use 381 for housing. And I'd be happy to get that to you if you'd like to take a look at it.
And MEDA is Michigan Economic Development
Thank you.
Association. We are never going to catch all of our acronyms. And James, just an example of that, like for instance, our property in Ypsilanti was owned by the local unit of government, but if you had a privately owned property, you could pass that through. Obviously, Washtenaw County doesn't have a local land bank, but through the state land bank to create eligibility.
Mhm.
And we're starting to see that more often. This idea, actually, this special economic development area, which is a gray area of Act 381, was brought to our attention through the state land bank folks.
And I'm gonna hold on right there because I'm looking at the time and knowing we have a couple other presenters. So any quick questions for Jill and Shannon?
If you're an attendee and want to ask a question that's totally within bounds, there's a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen.
All right, then I want to pass it on over to James. Would you mind introducing yourself, James? We had you
Sure.
ask a question. We didn't even say who you were. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay. My name is James Downing. I am the development manager at CSI Support and Development. We are a affordable, we're a nonprofit organization that owns, manages, and develops affordable senior housing. I think what makes us unique is we are organized as a consumer co-op. So that will be a lot of my presentation explaining what that means. I'm a Ann Arbor resident, calling in from Ann Arbor, if that's something I have to announce. Lived here for the last 2.5 years. I have spent most of my career, all of my career in real estate development, most of which in affordable housing. My entree to it actually was working on the NSP program in the city of Cleveland. And Jill is right, that was a rough program, and I'm glad to be doing something else. So with that, I guess I'll roll into my slideshow here. So not entirely sure how to share my screen.
There should be a toolbox that has a green square with an arrow, hopefully that
Oh,
says
yeah, there it
share
is.
screen. Okay, great.
Yeah, my clue was it said share screen. Okay. And are people looking at my slides now? I can't quite tell.
Oh, it's loading. Yes, we've got it, James.
Okay. Does it look like the slideshow? Well, I may
I think
just
I
have
can
to-
see the stuff to the left, but we can see it for all practical purposes.
Okay. Well, I'll just roll right through. So CSI Support and Development, we're as I said, nonprofit real estate company. We own, develop, and manage cooperatively managed senior housing. So our mission is to use our cooperative management system to provide the best senior affordable housing that can be provided. So we are really uniting two important elements that kind of creates the identity of who we are. So the first is we are organized as a consumer cooperative. So I know that Arrowhead Cooperative at least has presented to this body. We are also a cooperative, but we're a different flavor of cooperative, which I think kind of creates a different development structure than I think you see in the equity cooperatives. And then secondly, we are over the last half century, we've developed expertise in developing senior affordable housing with the available HUD programs. So there are other organizations around the country, other nonprofits that have built up their portfolio projects through these HUD programs, primarily the 202 program. We are one of them. And at the end of this, I'll talk a little bit about those programs, how they function, how they've changed over the years. So in a equity co-op, first to distinguish what the type of co-op we are, in an equity co-op, a member purchases a share of a company that owns a residential building or residential subdivision And by owning that share, you have the right to occupy a unit. Sometimes these are developed to maintain affordability. Sometimes they are developed to be the shares float with the market. So it's distinguished from a condo where you own a deed in a portion of a building. This is you own a share of the company that owns the entire building. So you don't own the real estate, you own a share of the company that owns the real estate. So examples in Ann Arbor are the Arrowwood Hills Cooperative and University Towers Cooperative. We are a consumer cooperative. So in a consumer cooperative, it is a business that is managed by its customers with the goal of meeting the needs of those customers. So probably the most common kind of consumer cooperative is a credit union. If you become a member of a credit union, you don't own a part of the company, but you have voting rights to influence the management of that company. Cooperative grocery stores are often consumer co-ops, but then they're also can be used as housing. And a local example is ICC, which runs student cooperatives in Ann Arbor. So here you joined the cooperative. You, as a member of the cooperative, you are engaged in the management of your home, and you vote on the board of directors and the direction of the organization as a whole, but you don't own a share in the company. At least I'm fairly certain that's how ICC works. Student cooperatives are often organized as a consumer co-op. So to give you a sense of how we came into being and how the consumer cooperative sort of ethos infuses our organization, I'll run through a little bit of our history. So we were founded by Fred and Virginia Thornthwaite. There's a picture here. So in the early 40s, coming out of the Great Depression, the Thornthwaites felt that a market-driven, competitive economic system was not meeting the needs of their friends and neighbors, and they felt there was a better way. So starting in the 40s, Fred organized a group of friends and neighbors to pitch in some money. So I think of the 20 of them, they put together $140 and they started a milk route. So that was our first line of business, was delivering milk to our 20 members at the time. Over the years that it grew, they eventually bought a dairy. The co-op grew to be 3 stores. We had these milk vending machines, which I'd never heard of before reading the history of CSI, but so that was our second co-op. So again, it was a group of people joining an organization to run this business that existed to meet their needs to have a convenient grocery store. The co-op expanded into other lines of businesses. We chartered a credit union, which is still in existence. It now goes by the name of Zeal. We in the 60s opened a co-op optometrist, and in the mid 60s we started producing affordable senior housing. So this picture here is a picture of our first affordable senior co-op, Wyandotte Co-op in Wyandotte, Michigan. By the early 80s, housing really predominated what we did. So the co-op spun off into Co-op Optical, which existed up until maybe 10 years ago. I think it was ultimately bought by LensCrafters or something, but was its own business for many years. And we, from the 80s on, really focused exclusively on affordable senior housing. So we expanded to the states of Maryland, Massachusetts, and California. And in 2012, we started also purchasing buildings that we did not develop and converting those into co-ops. So at this point, CSI operates 6,500 units and 61 co-ops in Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan and California. So at the building level, this is how the co-op operates. So at the top, you see their housing members are, a housing member is somebody who moves into our co-op. And by moving into our co-op, you are given membership into the co-op, which gives you voting rights to elect your floor representatives, officers of the co-op council, so president, treasurer, secretary, and a delegate to the co-op Congress, which is a body that exists throughout our organization over all the 61 co-ops. Housing members also annually will vote on our budget, which in our non-subsidized buildings includes what they're paying for rent. Day to day, the management of the co-op is done by the co-op council. So those are the elected building president, vice president, and secretary. So if you go into one of our buildings, you go into the management office, you will not be greeted by a property manager. You'll be greeted by one of our residents who has volunteered to play that role. They're supported by volunteer committees. So this is a little small here, but the leasing committee, our finance committee, the house rules committee, maintenance committee, programming committee. So I'll get to this a little bit later, but this blue box here, the CSI liaison, obviously running a large apartment building is a big task and something that needs to be done carefully and professionally. So we support our co-op members and volunteers with a lot of professional support out of our home office and our regional offices. So I'll get to that in a moment. So this is how the co-op operates in one of our buildings. Co-op wide, so over all 6,500 members of the co-op, our housing members also vote for voting rights to guide the direction of the organization as a whole. So each year we have an election for our board of directors. So this is like every nonprofit has a board. Our board is determined by our housing members voting from among their peers who ought to represent them on our board of directors. So like a board of directors in any nonprofit, they vote on major initiatives, they set the strategic direction of our organization, and they hire the CEO, who is then the head administrative officer for the whole organization. So our the employees of CSI Support and Development are ultimately responsible to our CEO, who's ultimately responsible to our board of directors. So to support our resident members, our staff, cooperative staff, we have our senior management to sort of guide the organization and assist the board of directors in setting direction and supervise staff. We have an education department, which is when we elect a new co-op council, there's obviously a lot to know about how to run a building. So there's a pretty intensive education period where once elected, we teach people how to, follow fair housing law, how to place work orders, how to prioritize work orders, how to think about a budget. So we educate the incoming co-op council, stay engaged with them through the 3-year term. A new council comes on and we repeat the process. Most of our buildings are income restricted. In fact, all of our buildings are income restricted. And the certification is sort of more than can reasonably be done by volunteers. We have a professional certification department, an accounting department, like any large organization, is required to keep track of our, 65 partnerships that own the various buildings and land we own. We have a development department where I work. Our job is to expand and preserve our co-op portfolio. So, as this body has been discussing, I work in tax credits, finding, attractive financing, gap financing to preserve our portfolio and build new buildings. And then facilities and construction, our major capital improvements are guided by construction professionals. So that's how the co-op works. So when you know, almost always when we say we're a co-op, people ask, well, so how is it that, you know, your residents own the buildings? How are you able to qualify for these programs you use, at least on the development side? And the answer is our residents are not, they don't have they don't own shares, they don't own, you know, their units, but they are the body that our organization is ultimately accountable to, and they and their 6,500 peers are the people who determine what CSI does, who leads our organization. So we really think of it as a partnership between, you know, the professional staff and our housing members. So to, you know, I think this group has heard a lot about housing programs. So we are very active in low-income housing tax credits, which are at this point the predominant way affordable housing is financed in the United States. But we built up our portfolio through HUD programs that were had for a long time been, oh, here we go. For a long time had been sort of a separate track through which affordable housing could be developed. So this is the primary one was the HUD 202 program. So I have a picture here of Lurie Terrace. This was a early, I believe it was financed with the 202 or the 236, which is sort of a sister program. So in the initial creation of this program in the late 50s, early 60s, it was sort of observed that there's a group of seniors who are unable to afford market rate apartments, but are too wealthy to afford to live in public housing. So a program was created to have very low interest loans that were repaid over a very long time that could only be applied for by nonprofits to build senior housing. The properties at this point were not subsidized. And when you look at the deed restrictions, some of them many of them didn't even necessarily restrict the incomes of the people who live there. They're just restricted to occupancy by seniors. And it was presumed because these loans were applied for by nonprofits with the goal of creating affordable senior housing, that the rents would be affordable. And, you know, I think I believe that is the case. That was the case in Lurie Terrace, and I think that in the case of Lurie Terrace, that proved out. The rents were kept affordable through until it was acquired by the Housing Commission, where they're still affordable. In 1975, the 202 program was reformed to include project-based Section 8 contracts. So these were contracts that provided a rental subsidy for people moving into these units where their rent was 1/3 of whatever their income was. So so this would allow, you know, very low to no income people to be able to live in a unit without becoming, you know, very rent burdened, In 1986, and then really growing through the 90s and the 2000s, the low-income housing tax credit came online. I'm adding this to this chart here because low-income housing tax credit really is particularly for building new projects and even really renovating projects is, you know, I'd say nine of 10 of affordable housing projects somehow involve low-income housing tax credits. In the early 90s, the 202 program was reformed again, such that instead of a loan, you were given a capital advance when you applied to this program. And instead of a Section 8 contract that would help you pay for your loan, you got something called a PRAC contract, where where the owner was receiving money to pay for the operating expenses of the building, but could not be used to support debt, which in its sort of initial grants makes sense because you're receiving this large capital advance, so there's not a need for debt. It became very difficult to refinance, however, because you had your income you couldn't use to support a first mortgage, which cut you off from a very large source of refinancing. So in 2019, the program, which had really been fallow for a couple of years, was relaunched such that it allowed a Section 202 funds to be used with a mortgage and also with tax credits, which it could be used with before in the past. So the capital stack you looked at Avalon, now the Section 202 funding can be a layer of that capital stack, has the unique facet though of coming with a rental subsidy contract, which where the out-of-pocket rent by the tenant is determined by what their individual income is, whereas a tax credit rent is determined by what the median income is of a large group of people, which may or may not meet people's personal needs. So it makes it a much more effective tool for targeting deep affordability and very low income people, which can be very challenging to do in an unsubsidized context. So here's some pictures of what our co-ops look like. So like I said, when you enter our management office, you'll be greeted by one of our residents. A great facet of the co-op is all of the volunteerism that is called upon by our members, really activates our public spaces, brings people out of their units, and fosters a really active lifestyle, which can be a challenge in senior buildings, that people will, retreat into their units, and social isolation and loneliness is a real social contributor to a lot of health issues. So bringing people out of their units, and creating these venues for people to collaborate to manage their homes. We're creating a environment where people feel valued, and people have a venue to meet their neighbors and work with their neighbors, and remain active in their senior years. So here's our Michigan residents having a great time in the shade of our solar paneled foyer. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions. I feel like covered a lot and talked fast through that. So happy to clarify or go deeper on anything I talked about here.
Did anyone have any specific questions for James? Okay, I have a specific question for James, but I also have some. Oh, Jennifer, you go first.
I actually have a comment, not a question.
Go for it.
Sorry. So Lurie Terrace, James was originally funded with a Section 202 loan. And when their restrictions ended, and they ended up, the nonprofit didn't want to continue having just one asset to manage, and they weren't interested in expanding their assets to other locations. So that's when the Housing Commission in the city purchased the property, and we have utilized what Jill talked about, which is we have a covenant deed restriction on it now. So we don't need the HUD restriction, and we don't need the don't need a land bank or land trust. So like, that's exactly what we did there was the things you guys are all talking about. So that's all coming full circle. So it's great to hear you guys.
Yeah, I think that scenario became not too uncommon in senior housing, that you would have very small nonprofits. Sometimes the nonprofit was just a group of volunteer board members owning very, very large assets, 250 units of affordable housing. It's the situation Lurie Terrace found it in is that's actually a common way we end up acquiring buildings, is coming across a nonprofit that 50 years ago, the parish or the labor union or the block group even thought it'd be a great thing to have affordable housing, and 50 years on they have a older building with capital needs and need the help of an organization like us who can or the Housing Commission, who can bring resources to make that asset last for the next 50 years.
So I have a series of questions for you, first from me and then two from an audience member that are all on a theme. Mine
Okay.
was the examples you gave for the non-equity, the co-op model that you use, were the sort of student housing, ICC. I lived in a co-op. It was a great example for me, and senior housing, which are kind of two affinity groups, demographic groups, with particular needs and time-based sort of reasons for moving in at certain ages. Are there examples of this model in more housing stock more broadly, or housing projects more broadly? And what challenges or sort of facilitating factors might exist in attempting that kind of model in more generic housing or generic affordable housing?
Yeah, well, so let me answer that two ways, I guess. In more generic housing, so housing that may or may not be affordable but is not deed restricted, so we'll think of it that way. I think a co-housing model might be something that is sort of similar to a consumer cooperative. I think a challenge with so I guess an issue with a consumer cooperative is, for housing, is where does the upfront capital come from to develop the housing? And in our case, in our portfolio, that by and large came from the 202, 236, and LIHTC programs. So the 202, it was designed for senior housing, funded senior housing. So we built our portfolio through that program, and are thus a owner of, we specialize in affordable senior housing. So there are many nonprofits that build family housing. There is not a reason a nonprofit that builds family housing couldn't organize as a consumer cooperative. I don't know of such an organization. There are the most affordable co-ops were built on an equity model that used sort of a different HUD. I mean, like Arrowwood or University Townhomes used a sort of a separate HUD program that was designed to fund equity co-ops. I hadn't actually really thought of that. So those are sort of my thoughts sort of off the top of my head.
Okay, and then the questions that we have from the audience, they go together. So an attendee asked, and this could be for you, James, or Shannon, or I don't see Jill right anymore. Oh, hi, there you are. Okay, I don't know if any of you can chime in, or Sean. So it was about the challenges. So I'll just read the question verbatim. What are some of the challenges of designating housing units for specific groups under fair housing law? So the post or the audience member said that in Australia, they're aware of projects dedicated to just housing women, but is that possible in Michigan? And then further, there's an increasing demand of housing for seniors in the LGBT community, and there have been projects developed to meet that need, but that though they were able to initially recruit residents for the projects, as time passes, there isn't a way to maintain that housing. Is that the case in Michigan? So I think generally speaking to housing for specific groups of people and legality of that and challenges of that in Michigan.
So for senior housing, I know at a very high level, my understanding is fair housing laws have been written in a way that allow for senior housing. So I think senior housing is maybe a carve out of groups that can be where housing can be developed and sort of dedicated to a demographic group. In terms of housing that is aimed housing that is built to meet the needs of an ethnic group, a sexual orientation. The housing can be, I would say, the ability to apply to live in that housing and the criteria to live in that housing can't be specific to race, gender, or sexual orientation. There are a number of projects around the country where there is programming targeted towards the demographic group. So, for example, there's in Cleveland, there's a senior housing building that was built for LGBT community. On the ground floor, it hosts a nonprofit that provides services for senior LGBT residents, and is a sort of hub for residents and non-residents. So bringing in the LGBT community, it's sort of a known place, a known option for people to look to find housing, but it has to comply with fair housing, which means any senior who cares to apply to live there has to be added to the waiting list, and rises through the waiting list and meet the move-in criteria that doesn't make reference to their identity. So.
Foster, any more questions, or I'm just kind of checking the time and think I may gotta move on a little bit more.
Yeah, that was all the questions I see so far. Oh wait, one just popped in, but I can. And I think you said, James, religious affiliation is one of the things you can't filter on, but you could create like an affinity group housing, like a housing center with a synagogue on the first floor that theoretically. Anybody could apply to live above. That was sort of the example.
Yeah. I mean, so there's dozens of buildings that are like St. Matthew's Home that are associated with a parish or synagogue. But right, they from a housing the perspective of running a housing business, it has to be operated in a non-sectarian way.
Thank you. Okay, that's all the questions.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, James. And I'm so glad you were here, because there's been so much interest in different cooperative models. And I really think what you guys do is really unique around the cooperative management. So I'm so glad you're able to be here and explain that. Also, James, as a resident, has applied to be on the HHSAB, so you may see him at future meetings as well. So Sean, thank you for coming. I I know you've worn a lot of different hats around your career previously at Develop Detroit and now the Ann Arbor Community Foundation, but maybe introduce yourself and a little bit of your background and development, and then I'll hit you with a couple questions.
Yeah, will do. Thanks. Thanks for having me. And want to just throw this out there. I had a dental procedure this morning and thought the anesthesia and the numbness would have dissipated by now, and it hasn't. So sorry if I'm a little hard to understand. So Sean White, have about a 8-year career so far in real estate and impact investing. So as she mentioned, I left the Alumni Association where I was colleagues with Travis, and went to Detroit to try to make my mark in real estate, and have a lot of lessons learned and a lot of headaches and scars from that experience. But it certainly was largely enjoyable and certainly impactful. So I spent 4 years at a nonprofit developer called Develop Detroit, working for Sonia Mays, who some of you may know. She's an incredible leader in the city, and then spent about a year at United Way before coming over to the Community Foundation. And I was really, as I said earlier, impacted in my work at Develop Detroit by impact investors who really unlocked several projects for us that would not have been, certainly wouldn't have been viable without that level of support and creativity. So that's kind of what brought me to the Community Foundation, and I've been here now for 7 months as impact investing manager, and so it's been a really great opportunity so far.
Awesome. So one of the things, and Jennifer had thought of this question earlier, is just thinking about your work in Detroit. What's different about that climate and what's happening here in and around Ann Arbor as far as development goes, market rate and or affordable?
Yeah, how much time do we have, Teresa?
Well, take what you need.
Yeah. So certainly still getting to know the greater Ann Arbor, Washtenaw area. But I think maybe four things stick out that are different. Just kind of juxtaposing Detroit to Washtenaw County. And I think maybe all of these are going to be obvious. The first is there's a lot of philanthropic capital in Detroit. Detroit's sort of a sexy city for philanthropists, and also we've got the benefit, and I actually am a resident of Detroit, we've got the benefit of a lot of old money. So we've got foundations like Hudson Weber, we've got the Kellogg Foundation, which is active here, Kresge, of course, some of the autos. So we've got private foundations, we've got corporate foundations, and so what that has, I think, allowed for the city is those foundations have been pretty active in grant making around real estate over the last couple of decades, and more recently have gotten very active in impact investing. So Kresge, I think, is probably the gold standard. Aaron Siebert runs that work for them and has done an incredible job of getting their board and their executive leadership to understand the importance of allocating, endowment assets for local investing. So that's the first is the philanthropic capital that's available in Detroit. That's just not, in Ann Arbor, the greater Ann Arbor area. We've got a few family foundations that are awesome. Obviously, the Community Foundation, we play a role and want to play a larger one as we move forward, but it's just not the same as what Detroit has to offer. I think secondly is the community development financial institution ecosystem in Detroit. CDFIs were created, I think, in 2000, maybe in the mid 90s, but just sort of in response to a lot of underinvestment in urban and rural communities, and primarily urban communities. And so in Detroit, of course, there was a lot of disinvestment, a lot of folks were moving, a lot of businesses and jobs were leaving. And so I actually haven't counted in a while, but I remember there was probably at least 7 or 8 CDFIs that are very active here. And community development financial institutions are important because they will often lend into communities and into projects that that banks and other sort of traditional lenders won't touch. That's why they were created, and they'll do so with terms that hopefully are helpful to projects. Now, it doesn't always happen that way, unfortunately, but I think when I first got to Ann Arbor, I called all of my contacts in the CDFI world here in Detroit and said, hey, you know, doing some work out of Greater Ann Arbor now, would love to bring you guys in. And I think all but one said, we're not interested. And the one who said they potentially would be interested hasn't returned my calls since. So that's a big difference in terms of Detroit versus Washtenaw County. And then the other two quickly, the area median income actually is really difficult in the city of Detroit, because it's even with some of the inflation around that number with Grosse Pointe and some of the other suburbs, it's still much lower than the AMI in Ann Arbor. And so what that means is that AMI is area median income. So what that means is that for developers especially, Ann Arbor and the greater Ann Arbor area is actually pretty attractive because, you know, if you're looking at being able to make rents at 80% of AMI, and AMI is inflated to, I think maybe now it's 70 grand or maybe a little bit more than that. It's almost a market rate unit. Whereas in Detroit, it is more difficult to make those numbers work on the rental side, because, you know, we all know construction costs have just continued to go up. So that's the third major difference. And I would say lastly, there's just, and it hasn't always been this way, but I would say in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of additional capacity for development in the city of Detroit. I mentioned Sonia Mays and Develop Detroit earlier, the firm I used to work at, or the nonprofit. But that nonprofit was launched maybe 8 or 9 years ago in response to the city, Mayor Duggan and a few others saying, we really need more nonprofit developers in the city who can work at scale. You know, not there were a lot of community development corporations doing kind of smaller multifamily things, maybe a duplex on this corner and a fourplex on the next. But they really were hoping to bring in a nonprofit developer who, you know, could go after 60-unit new construction deals while at the same time, you know, acquiring a large portfolio that might be on the market. And so Develop Detroit's here. There's a few others. I know that Communities First Inc. has come into town, a really reputable nonprofit. Obviously, Shannon and Jill are really, really familiar and have done a lot of work in the city of Detroit. So when I got to Ann Arbor, you know, obviously, everyone first told me about Avalon, who does great work, and of course, Jennifer and the Housing Commission. But I will say that is a big difference, because I think the biggest nonprofit sort of quasi government developer in Washtenaw County is the Housing Commission, and in Ypsilanti it's probably the Housing Commission as well, and that's just very different than the case in Detroit. So there's more competition, which is sometimes good and sometimes can cause some negative sort of externalities in a way, but those are the major differences. I think if the Community Foundation has kind of asked me if I could have a genie grant a wish, what would it be? And I think it would be to scale up a nonprofit developer in a way that gives them patient equity, you know, where they can build a staff and can kind of complement a lot of the work that Avalon's doing, that Jennifer and the Housing Commission are doing, but maybe accelerate them with additional capital, because that's what has really slowed down the developers here in the city of Detroit. The nonprofit developers especially, they just did not have the capital to move in the same way that for-profit developers that are not mission oriented have. And what that caused in the very beginning of COVID and the pandemic, all these landlords were kind of freaking out. So you continually saw these properties on the market, and nonprofits would call their foundation partners to say, hey, this is on the market, it's 2 million. We think we can get it for 1.9, but we only have 600 grand of equity, and the CDFIs are going to move too slow. And by the second call, the property had been purchased by a for-profit developer who it was able to move much more quickly. So that would be my one. Let me say maybe one more thing. That's important. I think building up more capacity in the area. But the other thing is the Community Foundation. We've started our impact investing journey, but we're investing $10 million over the next few years in the county, and way more capital than that. That is mission oriented, has to flow into these projects if we're going to see things get done, because as you heard all these acronyms before in this meeting, the BRA and TIFs and home and CDBG, all of those are just acknowledgements that it costs more to build real estate and housing than what we're able to get in rents or from home buyers. So there's a delta, and something has to make that up. And in my opinion, I think in the Community Foundation's opinion, that should really be philanthropic or mission-oriented capital. And so my quest is, and some people tell me that I'm crazy, but I would really love to see, a few of the universities, I won't name them, but a few of the universities that are in the area to allocate, some of their endowment assets to local investing. We've got a retirement system that has quite a few assets, and the last time I tried to check these things relatively consistently, and a lot of the fixed income funds that a lot of these endowments and institutions are investing in have not been performing very well. And so a lot of what we've done at the Community Foundation is say, if we're investing in a REIT that's doing investments in California and generating 8% in returns, or we're invested in a municipal bond allocation in Tennessee that's doing 3%, why wouldn't we reallocate and generate similar returns here in Washtenaw County, but actually benefit the communities that are close to home? So that's the other thing that I'm hoping to do in my time, along with a lot of other partners at the Community Foundation, is try to encourage our institutional partners in the county to allocate as many of their assets as they possibly can to help a lot of these affordable housing projects and other really important community development projects to actually become viable and see life. So that's kind of some things that I've seen in Detroit that I'm hoping we will see more of in Washtenaw County.
Thanks, Sean. I asked you one question and you end up knitting everything together for me. So thank you very much. That was fantastic. Maybe we just open it up to questions of all of our presenters tonight. If there's any other questions you have.
If you're an attendee, type your Q&A into the Q&A bubble box. And if you are a box on the screen, you feel free to unmute and just ask the question, panelists to each other, or board members to panelists, or council members to panelists. Lynn.
So Sean, have you looked at other cities where, you've talked about trying to convince say universities to share their endowment, but have you looked at So I'm thinking of Durham, Durham, North Carolina. Travis is going to laugh. Uh, where, you know, they passed their affordable housing millage before we did, but they also had this nice kind of convening of their local banks, their community foundation, and municipal money come together for affordable housing projects downtown. And just having that public-private you know, like philanthropy, private banking, and public money come together seemed like kind of a conversation that's not really happening here. And I say this as a former community foundation board member. I think we were trying to poke around and think about it when I was there. And we looked at Baltimore, what Baltimore was doing, right? And I think that's the work that you're continuing with, like allocating a certain percentage of all the community foundation's assets to this work. But I guess I'm just wondering if you've seen other cities that have done this, where they've had these nice partnerships with private and philanthropic money to get to where we need to be for housing.
Yeah. So I'm aware of the collaboration in Durham. There's a pretty similar collective effort in Atlanta that has gone pretty well, where they've brought in some of the institutions, some of the universities and other institutions to. I think they really call themselves a funder collaborative. Again, that has some pros and some cons to it. They're not able to move as swiftly as like one fund might be able to, right? And so I think that is something that at the Community Foundation we're spending a lot of time thinking through. You know, like we've got $10 million that we are certainly going to be investing in the area. And would it make sense for us to go out and raise dollars from other institutions into our own fund so that we've got 20 or 25 million? Or should we say, we're committing 10, we want you to commit 2, we want you to commit 3, and ultimately work that way. And there have been some, again, from the collaborative in Atlanta, the lessons learned there is there are some challenges to the funder collaborative model. So there's also a pretty strong model in Chicago. I can't remember the institution, the university that's tied in, but it's another, you know, the municipality, the county, the university, and a couple of other local institutions are all working together. I think focusing specifically on investing or creating collaboratives or collaboratives. So, or co-ops rather, sorry, co-ops. That and I can send that information along. Like those are really exciting, and they've had a lot of good success there, creating new jobs, increasing worker compensation and worker ownership. But yeah, I mean, we're still pretty early in the process. So, Lynn, if there are resources that you know of, would love for you to send those along, because we're really actively talking to our attorneys and a few others on the board, obviously, to figure out like what the best way to structure this is.
Sorry, yeah, and I forgot Duke. Yeah, Duke was part of that in Durham, right? So if I'm here to embarrass U of M, if we're going to say that Duke can do this, I know it's a private university, but Durham is a small town, and it really lives by its progressive values. So, and we have a new president right here at U of M. So it'd be interesting if, I know the headlines wrote itself, Santa's coming to town, but I'd like to see what Santa can bring. So he can bring dollars for housing. I hope Christmas comes early to Ann Arbor.
Love it. Yeah, there's, I mean, that's my hope. I think I last saw that the university's up to maybe 17 or 18 billion. And I can't remember if the chief investment officer is still there, Eric Lumberg. But again, obviously they've done a great job growing their endowment. I think what our argument is, or our case maybe, is that we have been able to, and we believe that the universities and others will be able to still grow their endowments while being able to contribute to what's going on, right in our neck of the woods. So yeah, I'm sure President Ono I think that was his last name, right? Oh no. I'm sure he's got a list of, meetings to have, and I would imagine this would be pretty low on that list. But that's my hope, is that we can continue kind of putting positive, pleasant but persistent pressure on the university to at least engage around this conversation. And same thing for the retirement system and the Community Foundation for Southeastern Michigan. To our knowledge, they're not yet investing locally through impact investing, and they've got a little over $1 billion in their endowment under assets under management. So yeah, we're trying to just build build partnerships as much as possible, because we know $10 million just won't be anywhere close to what we need to make a tangible difference.
Yeah, I guess I just want to point that out as an example of what other cities have done and what we can follow, instead of, council we have council members who are focusing on pushing the university to build a certain number of units. I mean, I guess we can ask all day. And it's not the first time I think we can ask for these things, but it's for me, it's more trying to figure out like how we can, where's the capital to actually get it done, because the regents and the president can just say, sure, maybe, or no, versus yes, because then how are we going to do it? So, and funding's always, housing just doesn't build itself. So cool. I'm excited that they are the Community Foundation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Susan Wyman put a great comment in the chat to this point. The University of Michigan Health System has recently signed on to be a healthcare anchor institution, which calls for 1% of the institution's investment to be made locally. So Susan, please meet Sean, and Sean meet Susan later. Maybe we can get introductions, but thanks for sharing that, Susan.
Susan is a Ward 2 resident. A lot of things can happen in Ward 2, Sean.
Any other questions for our awesome presenters tonight? Thank you all for being here. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, James. Thanks, Sean. And congrats, Sean, on the new baby, by the way. So thanks for being here with all that going on.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll put all of the acronyms that didn't get captured in the description of the YouTube video, and it'll be great. And everyone will learn a lot, which is the whole point of the Ed series. So really, thank you for joining us. All panelists